Yeah, well, today was kind of a big shock. The one time I decided to sleep in and miss that Nintendo Direct, every major horror game developer decides, you know what, this is the time to drop something big. Not only did we get a new trailer for Resident Evil Requiem, but we also got the announcement of a Fatal Frame 2 remake coming to all modern consoles. Guys, get hyped! Anyway, as always, today I'm going to take another look at the trailer as I break down and go over every single small detail that I could possibly find and give you guys my thoughts on it. Before we get started though, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel for more survival horror content and more importantly, updates on Resident Evil Requiem. Also, hit that like button if you enjoyed today's topic. Finally, this video is officially sponsored by G Fuel, so if you're looking for ways to support the channel, consider picking up your favorite tub of G Fuel using the link below or the code NerdSpaceGames at checkout to save up to 20% off your next order. Anyways, we start off the trailer with a phone ringing and some more shots of the Renwood Hotel. Obviously, the phone call is the one that Grace gets later in the trailer, but the shots here are what really interests me. Maybe I'm reaching here, but the clips of the staircase and the hallways really scream Spencer Mansion here, at least in terms of the atmosphere and the vibe, and it makes me pray that we get to explore the Renwood Hotel for a long period of time, not just a small section at the start of the game. Anyways, after the phone call, we get a shot of Grace walking down a busy street in what I can assume is Rhodes Hill, where Renwood Hotel is located. The first scene actually shows this restaurant in the background, Grill 14. Interesting name, as Resident Evil 3 Nemesis features a restaurant called Grill 13, which obviously was located in Raccoon City. Maybe a local chain restaurant in the area, perhaps? This might be another hint towards the fact that this town where Renwood Hotel is at, most likely Rhodes Hill, is very close to where Raccoon City was at. After the scene, we find Grace coming across a cop just outside of the crime scene at Renwood Hotel in the present day. Now, this cop actually matches one of the voices that we heard in the original trailer, leaving only one voice left unaccounted for.
Investigating all these strange deaths, huh? Investigating all these strange deaths, huh?
That, of course, is the one that sounds like Jeff Shine, the voice of Chris Redfield and Carlos.
Have you seen the same shit I've seen?
I already talked about my theory for who this voice could possibly belong to, but my money's on the fact that this voice belongs to a man that Alyssa was meeting with at the start of the game before coming back to the hotel room the night of her murder. As Grace is investigating the scene, we notice something different that I don't think any of us really pointed out to before in the present day scenes from previous trailers. Renwood Hotel actually has fire damage all over the building. This is confirmed by a scene later in the trailer, so we'll talk more about that later as it brings up an interesting question. After this, we get a flashback scene that shows Grace following Alyssa down the stairs before hiding some sort of file behind a picture. Obviously, these files are what the killer was probably after, and it probably provides some key information about the investigation of Raccoon City that Alyssa was looking into. The weird thing about this is that obviously Grace saw her mother hide this file behind the picture, but after her mother's death, she never went back and got that file. At least not until the present day, in which we see Grace grab it then. The simple solution is that Grace probably just forgot all about it, as that was a very traumatic day for her. I mean, she almost died and she lost her mother that same day. You can't really blame her for forgetting about the file. Regardless, Grace's memory of the file comes back when she sees the picture and she retrieves it. As soon as she does, though, she hears something nearby and we hear this line.
I've been watching you. You're not like other people, you know. You're quite unique.
Yeah, clearly this is the same guy as the man in the chair, but interesting enough, his accent is starting to sound less and less like Oswald E. Spencer. Actually, his voice doesn't really sound like anybody in the Resident Evil universe, but clearly we know he's going to be connected to Umbrella in some way, especially when we see another short scene later in the trailer. On that note, we do get a look at the man's face, well, sort of, later in the trailer, but more on that later. Following the scene, we get a look at a huge building, which I would assume is the hospital in Rhodes Hill where the demo takes place at. There's no real confirmation of that, but just looking at the architecture and style of the building, I'd say it definitely matches the interior of the hospital and scenes that we've seen so far in the trailers. We get some more familiar scenes from different angles and more dialogue from the man in the chair, but in one scene we see a close-up of the sequence we saw in the trailer, and now we can clearly see that there's some sort of mask or device next to the man. This device will come up later on, so again, bear with me. Next, we see Grace finding a picture of herself moments before Alyssa's murder, which means they were watching Grace specifically. This confirms a theory that a lot of us have had about the fact that Grace is the target of whatever organization this is because they are after her antibodies to the daylight vaccine. Clearly, they were watching Grace, not Alyssa in this scene. After that moment, this is where we actually get a lot of good stuff as we hit multiple scenes all at once. We get a closer look at the guy in the hood again, much closer this time actually. Personally though, I don't notice anything different in this scene that makes me lean off of the people that I've been saying it could be, except that his lips look slightly different from Nikolai's lips. But in all honesty, I don't think there's enough to change my mind completely about who I think this is. Another scene shows us our first look at a different gun outside of the small handgun that we see Alyssa and Grace use in previous trailers. Now this gun kinda looks like something that Blue Umbrella from Resident Evil 7 were using, specifically Chris's squad in the Not a Hero DLC. It's actually like a cross between those weapons and Barry's Magnum and Resident Evil Remake. Could that organization, Blue Umbrella, be involved in this game? I don't know, maybe. Moving on, we see a scene in which the room in which Alyssa was murdered at catches on fire after a lantern falls and hits the floor. It kind of looks like someone used the lantern to knock out the man in the hood, probably after he killed Alyssa. I don't know if this was a third party or if this was Grace herself, but considering her lack of experience at the time of this scene, since it probably takes place long before she joins the FBI, I don't know if I believe Grace was able to do this on her own. My guess, someone came up behind the man and caught him off guard and knocked him out, saving Grace. More on that in a bit though, as we get another scene there in just a moment. Anyways, we also get a scene of Grace looking at a woman in a white dress looking puzzled. At first, I thought maybe this could be Alyssa, but after examining the video a little more, Grace seems a little too calm for that to be the case. Straight up, I think it's just a patient who was being experimented on by the man in the chair, as another scene in this trailer definitely makes this man appear to be some sort of mad scientist type. We also see this woman later in the trailer looking extremely creepy with white hair, probably infected by the same virus as the body that Grace saw in the demo, as well as some sort of maid or receptionist banging her head against a mirror. Yeah, creepy. We get another glance at Alyssa's murder, this time seeing her body and fire spreading across the room as Alyssa screams. Now, a couple of things here. One, this obviously confirms that yeah, Alyssa clearly died here. However, I don't think it's quite that simple. See, obviously with the fire spreading the way it does, there's no way that Grace is going to be able to get her mom's body out of the building. This honestly sets up the stage for Alyssa to be the hack even more so now, as we now know that the man in the hood is in this room knocked out as well, and so is Alyssa's body. So he could get up after Grace leaves, take Alyssa's body, and bring it to the man in the chair who experiments on her body, creating the hag monster that we see in the demo. Pretty tragic, I know, but this is Resident Evil that we're talking about. So one thing I want to add before I move on to another clip, but I want to talk about this burn victim of some sort. It clearly isn't Alyssa. The body looks like it's more of a male figure, and it doesn't look like the same outfit. Like if you look at the white pants, shorts, or something right there, it doesn't look like the outfit that Alyssa was wearing. My guess is that this is the hooded man without his hood, which means someone must have came and got his body. So maybe he wasn't the one that took Alyssa's body, but maybe the mad scientist that we'll talk about in just a little bit came and collected his body and Alyssa and brought them back and, you know, experimented on both of them. I don't know, it's something really interesting to point out, and I'm really curious about this because the fact that they're showing us this scene makes me think that this guy might not have died in the fire either, and that he might have been resurrected by the mad scientist into something maybe more dangerous and more disturbing that we'll see later in the game. Also, going back to something I said earlier about how I don't think Grace was the one that knocked the man out, I think something that adds more to that is the fact that Grace probably wouldn't leave her mom's body behind and would try her best to drag her body out of the burning building. My guess is that the same person that knocked the man in the hood out will also be the same one that drags Grace out of the building, saving her from the fire. Straight up, that's just a wild theory, as the trailers don't really show any sort of person being in the room during this sequence at all, but yeah, I just want to throw that out there. Then we briefly see the Umbrella logo, which confirms exactly what we all already know, that the villain or villains of the game will be deeply connected to Umbrella in some way. We also get another look at the gun, which again has a similar style to guns that Blue Umbrella designed for the BSAA in Resident Evil 7. And finally, the money shot, we get a look at the man in the chair, as in his face, and I gotta say, I was not expecting him to look like this at all. Few things to point out here though. One, he's wearing the device on his head that was next to him in a previous scene. So this 100% confirms that this is indeed the man in the chair, at least to me it does. Two, his look and the equipment that he's wearing on his head screams mad scientist, which tells me that this guy was probably a scientist for Umbrella back in the day, and he's been performing experiments in Rhodes Hill for God knows how long. Also, looking at the shape of the man and his jawline, unless he gained a lot of weight since the murder of Alyssa, this man is definitely not the hooded man. It appears that the hooded man and the man in the chair are indeed two separate people, unlike other theories have suggested towards. Now, trying to identify who this guy actually is kind of difficult. He doesn't look like a character from a previous Resident Evil game, but it's also been a long time since someone like, I don't know, Oswald E. Spencer has appeared. Comparing those two individuals specifically, most of the characteristics don't really match except maybe the chin, and even then, this guy clearly has gained a lot of weight if it's Spencer. However, there's one other theory that has been around for a while now that everybody has been talking about, and that's Brandon Bailey. Technically, while he's been talked about since Resident Evil 5 as the apprentice of James Marcus, we've never seen what Brandon Bailey looks like. Hell, we haven't even heard what Brandon Bailey sounds like, which means that could be his accent that we keep hearing. So it's quite possible that this guy could be Bailey since we don't know what he looks like or what he sounds like. I also think there's a possibility that this guy might not even be the main villain of the game. I mean, think about Village. When it came to Mother Miranda, while talked about in previous trailers, wasn't really officially shown off until like the 4th trailer, I believe. Could we see the same thing happening here? Possibly. Maybe that woman in Rhodes Hill in the first trailer is the main villain. Who knows? Also, side note, going back to the man in the chair, the clip that we see at the end of the trailer has like a scar going from his lip all the way down his chest. And I don't know if this really connects to any character that we've been introduced to so far, but the first thing that comes to mind is actually Oswald E. Spencer. And I'm not just saying that because that's my theory as to who I think the main villain of this game is. If you go back to Resident Evil 5, the way that Spencer died, he had his like chest burst open by Wesker's like punch. Like he literally has a hole in his chest. So this scar kind of being where that chest area is, maybe this has something to do with how Spencer originally died, quote unquote died, by Wesker. I don't know, that's probably kind of a reach, but I just wanted to throw that out there just in case that comes back to bite me in the ass. Anyway, with that, the trailer ends and we are once again left with more questions than answers, as always. There's still so many things we want to know, and Capcom seems to be teasing us by dropping these breadcrumbs for us to follow, and I gotta say, I love it. I love the way they've been handling the marketing for RE9 so far. By the way, we've now seen, based on recent trailers, that most of the things shown off so far take place in the first hour or maybe the first 2 hours of the game. Kind of interesting since I'm sure this game will be much longer than that, and with that in mind, it's like, what is so important that Capcom has to hide anything past the first 2 hours from us up until this point? My guess is probably that the second protagonist will have a much bigger role than people think. Well, that's it for today's episode of Nerdspace Games. What did you think of the newest trailer? Did it confirm or debunk anything for you? Let me know your thoughts down below. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerdspace Games. Take care.